Welcome to this coffee around this so nice Friday afternoon. Today we're very honored to have invited Dr. Stephen Walsh, who is Lyle Jones Distinguished Professor at the Department of Geography, also the Director for Center for Galapagos Island. Hopefully we have some nice pictures. At University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. The topic for today's talk will be enhanced process understanding of the drivers of land use, land cover change by synthesizing across agent-based models. Let's welcome.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here. Thank you very much for ordering up such a wonderful day. I suppose the white stuff will be coming soon enough. Thank you very much to Francis for the invitation, for Steve for getting me at the airport and regaling me in all the conversations of land use communities and so forth, and seeing friends I haven't seen in a while. Irini I haven't seen in many years, so it's nice that you came as well. So thank you very much. What I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about a lot of different things, if you don't mind. Instead of choosing a single topic and trying to really roll back a lot of the layers of information that you might not care too much about, but project modelers and so forth really would, I decided I would give you a bit of a tour of what I've been looking at by looking at 3 different study areas. And what that requires is your patience of letting me tell you a little bit about each story. Not so much that you get engulfed in all the nuances, but a little bit about the story so that I can tell you how we've decided to try to understand selected processes. So I guess the way you could look at it, I've decided to opt for a broad extent of what I've been doing instead of one that is super deep. I hope that's all right with you. So I've chosen 3 study areas. I've worked in Nang Rong, Thailand for a number of years. I worked with 2 gifted social demographers and sociologists. And we've been working there from about 1993 on. The project has just ended after continuous funding all these many years and more students that I can shake a stick at and a lot of papers that finished. So I want to talk to you about some of that. I've started some work in the Ecuadorian Amazon that began through this large LBA program that NASA funded to understand the Amazon basin, and that's where I spent a lot of time with the land use change community. And it was good for the entire community, but it was certainly good for my Ecuador work. More recently, I've moved into the Galapagos Islands. I was invited to do some work there, and now they're never going to get rid of me. I've defined the new invasive species because it's a wonderful place to be, but it's also pressed by the issues of human dimension and environment. So the crossover across all these projects is the relationship between people and environment and the nature of the feedback loops. I've decided to focus on processes that I think are important in all of these, and maybe with a few distillation slides at the end that tell you a little bit about some lessons learned. So let me launch in. The Thailand story. Northeast Thailand is a relatively dry agricultural frontier. Maybe we turn some lights down. Thank you. It used to be about a 4-hour, 5-hour drive from Bangkok. It's now about 3 hours drive. Everything is getting closer, of course. It's primarily a rain-fed paddy rice environment. It is now sufficiently close to Bangkok that off-farm employment and migration and remittances seem to be a dominant perspective. Historically, it's nuclear settlement patterns, nuclear village settlement patterns with agricultural lands arrayed around it, primarily, as we see in this air photo of the intensity of rain-fed paddy rice buns. The landscape, while relatively flat, is dominated by lowland paddy rice and upland field crops. The upland field crops are relatively new. With the demand in Europe in the 70s and 80s, deforestation happened considerably, so cassava and sugarcane are primarily in the upland crops. And the center areas, the upper paddy and the middle paddy in this agro-geomorphic setting, are really the transition areas of opportunity. During high commodity prices, people are willing to creep up or down from the optimum areas in the lowland paddy or the upland field crops into this risky opportunity. Also, when climate conditions are such, people are willing to creep up or creep down accordingly. So that is the absorber of opportunity, and it is these nodes or these concentrated areas in the lowlands and the uplands that really are the core areas of the dominant crops. So one of the things we started doing is to not only look at social surveys and many other things to understand this, but to begin to look at complexity theory. I decided that given that Steve probably does a lot of conversations about complex systems and biocomplexity and agent-based models, that I would only come in and show you a couple slides about it just to make sure that we're all on the same page. In essence, we're talking about how do systems self-organize. We're talking about basically how fundamental rules at an individual or household level, how the manifestation is an emergent property across large geographic areas. We're talking about how fundamental rules are then manifested and how they are captured in our code. We're looking at primarily issues of adaptive behaviors, critical thresholds where systems change trajectories, feedback mechanisms, of course, that basically humans affect the environment basically further shapes human behavior, and really trying to look at micro-level characteristics and how they're emerging across the landscape. So when we talk about agents, we're talking about basically individuals or households, as in the nature of Thailand, and how they are autonomous decision makers, and how there are sets of characteristics that define the agents and the characteristics of them. Agents differ in very fundamental ways. They learn differently, they have different social networks, different spatial networks, they interact with the environment in very fundamental different ways. And so we've decided to try to look at this by building a variety of agent-based models. The one I'll talk to you today about, I know there are a lot of words on here, apologies. I'm not going to talk very much about the social module, but let me just tell you that it is about household assets, and it's about migration from the agricultural lands to off-farm employment in Bangkok and the eastern seaboard and other large industrial centers. We have a land use module that I'll spend a little bit more time talking to you about, which is about land suitability and crop yields. In essence, the entire model is to try to understand household wealth and assets and how that has shaped human behavior. The way we're getting at that, we're doing social surveys. We have a large longitudinal survey that began in 1984 with 10,000 households as the agent, and we've been tracking them through 3 different time frames. We have a deep satellite time series that allows us to understand trajectories of land use change and productivities and deforestation. We have a lot of multi-thematic social and ecological data that are organized within the GIS, and a suite of software modules that allow us to track not only social networks and individual links between individuals and individuals and households to households, and even villages to villages, but also a set of models that are embedded as the basis of our agent-based models, looking at yields of crops and looking at land suitability. So all of this is part of the amalgam that holds the study together. Social surveys, linked attributes, longitudinal data, demographic surveys, socioeconomic surveys. We track people where they are in the village. We track them when they go to an urban destination. We follow them and we interview them again. They can't get away from us. But that gives us a lot of staying power about the nature of these relationships. So the general layout of the model is to try to look at this main module and to look at the kinds of things that we're interested in. We're interested in things about fertility, mortality, marriage rates, migration, asset coefficients, yield tables. We're interested in issues of household splitting through marriage. We're interested in how land parcels are shared through inheritances. We're interested in how we have demographic change within the household, so we track births and deaths and marriages. And the land use module, that's where we're looking at agricultural yields of rice, of cassava, of other important crops, agroforest crops in the district. We're looking at input classes such as soils and yields and land use, all taken from satellite image processing that fuels the models. The way we tend to look at this is that, so the inputs that we calculate, the maximum entropy model basically looks at land suitabilities. climate scenarios from demographic data that helps us understand human dimensions as it relates to climate change. Yield tables from DaySat models all go into understanding the nature of land and the nature of its uses, the changes between agricultural crops. We are interested in understanding how wealth is aggregated as a consequence of agricultural production, as well as remittances from migrants that go to off-farm employment. All of these basically situations, in the green are the land modules, the blue are the social modules, that are in a very generalized view. The situation is that we're trying to understand how climate basically perturbs an existing system. How the issue of a landscape that has been marginalized for a very long time, people are learning how to use limited water, limited labor, relatively poor soils, poor drainage, and the notion is how do they adapt further in the case of extreme events. Part of that is to understand social networks. This graphic basically is trying to show that in a particular village with a set of households arrayed by the small dwelling units, small houses, that there are families, so we're dealing with individuals and households. We're interested in understanding that the head of household actually owns various property, and how land parcels may be shared between individual households as well. We're interested in how assets are redistributed across households, particularly when we have marriage and a movement of an individual to another household, when we have individuals that migrate to the city or migrate for part of agriculture, and how do social networks operate. So we have a lot of data, we've got a lot of work to try to understand how individuals are related to individuals within individual households, how households to other households are related within the same village and within different villages. We have 51 villages and 10,000 households. So it's a fairly labor-intensive job to begin to understand these social relationships. We also have used this maximum entropy model, as I indicated, which is basically an envelope model, so we can predict, in fact, what kinds of environmental conditions are best for certain agricultural crops. The first paper I've got shown here, one of my PhD students, Ben Human, who's at Central Michigan right now, we did some work published in Ecological Informatics that basically looked at environmental controls of crop production and crop suitabilities. The second paper in the Annals just this year looked at how to deal with niche-based models when we're dealing with human-managed landscapes. And so in this case, the things that predict agricultural crops is not only soils and moisture and terrain settings and geomorphic settings, it is about the nature of the human imprint on the landscape and the reach of that dimension. And this is what some of these MaxEnt models look like that are color-coded. They're surfaces that help us generate where crops are particularly most sensitive to in terms of habitat suitabilities. So some of the work that we've looked at here, households are primary agents. They affect the behavior of individual household members in individual households. We're looking at land on plots that are registered in individual households. We're looking at environmental characteristics of that land, and we're looking at how households in villages are related to one another. We've been simulating, for example, land use for households. We're interested in individual plots. Individual plots are tied to individual households. They don't live on the parcel that they work, but they are associated nonetheless. There is a whole degree of cooperation as water is moved throughout the bunds, as fertilizers are applied, and so forth. The third point here is that we've worked hard to try to understand climate shocks to systems. And so we've created a number of climate scenarios that look at intensity, duration, and onset of floods and droughts, and we've tried to raise the issue of what kind of magnitude of climatic shocks do in fact modifications are seen. And our last point here is that because this area is so marginalized, there is historical adaptation already to living in a marginalized environment. And therefore what we've seen is really the changes of behavior are only at the extremes of climate. The normal climates, or the deviations from a normal climate, aren't very great, almost imperceptible. But when in fact we have the 7-year flood or the 7-year drought, then we have a dynamic change in that the marginality of the site has conditioned the population to react in certain ways which are fairly benign, you don't tend to see a lot of reaction except to the extreme events. Let me make another jump then. The Ecuadorian Amazon, where Thailand was about wealth and assets and about conditions of the land and about the changing dynamic of the land. The issue primarily was how to accumulate wealth and assets through remittances sent through off-farm employment and through changes in agricultural yields. Here, it's primarily an issue of trying to understand deforestation patterns, agricultural extension, and basically urbanization. The regional context is that as we look west towards the Andes, we have a lot of primary forest still here. But in this part of the area, we see this yellow and light green, which are agricultural areas, areas that have been massively deforested. The storyline is that in the late 60s and early 1970s, Texaco was invited in to prospect for oil. Heretofore, it was almost no roads, primarily movement along rivers and creeks, and primarily indigenous communities. But because roads were laid for pipelines and exploration, the landless streamed in. So there was a spontaneous colonization, not spurred by any government program, but the landless wanted land. So people came in from the coastal plain, they came in from the Sierra, and they settled in the Ecuadorian Amazon. We did see the beginning of developing towns, Lago Agria, the region's central city, small towns, indigenous communities along forest clearings. This is the landscape. It really is a rather messy landscape now, with deforestation happening along pipeline corridors that are part of the mainstay of what the Ecuadorian Amazon looks like. Fortunately, there is a lot of reforestation. It's not only deforestation, where you have trees that can grow 5 to 6 meters a year. There is a quick reclaiming of some of the carbon budget, but still the habitat and the ecosystem services changed considerably. We do have some African palm and other large plantations, but in most cases, the proximate drivers of change in the Amazon are individual households. It's not like in the Brazil with large ranches and corporate farming. That's not the case primarily in the Ecuadorian Amazon. As we look at a satellite image, we can see the individual farms with a simple finca arrangement, and we can see a lot of the land change. We can see some urban structures along the primary road. And so it is clear that as we began to try to understand what was going on through social surveys, this one is a survey that only shows individual colonist farms and individual communities that were surveyed. We also did indigenous community surveys as well through ethnographic procedures as well as a survey instrument to begin to consolidate information about the key stakeholders in this particular study area. As we look at some of the outcomes from some survey data, we can certainly see that the deforestation between 1990 and 1999, and we've done smaller surveys since then, has really begun to change. Subsistence agriculture has also changed, and there is a movement to more commercial agriculture. Almost all the information that we consolidated or placed in the geographic information system, whether we are working in a raster environment or an object environment, or it doesn't really matter. But satellite imagery, terrain models, aerial photography, historical aerial photography, cadastral data, linked attribute data, they're all organized in that way. And that is consistent across the entire project, depending on whether you're a sociologist or a planner or a biostatistician. Because we're interested in deriving a whole series of suitabilities that helped us with our modeling. So, in addition to building GIS surfaces, the things that I'm not going to talk about are basically the things that fed forward into the agent-based model. We did a lot of work with statistical models, whether they be multi-level models that basically tried to link household responses relative to urban structures or community structures. Community might provide issues of capital, of financing, of services, of jobs, off-farm employment. So what was happening at the farm level was certainly connected to the next higher social order, in this case, communities. We did a lot of work with geographically weighted regressions, basically looking at the spatial patterns of social and ecological variables. A lot with logistic regression, cluster analysis, spatial structure and land use lane cover models, etc. Now I mention that only in that as one is developing weights and other relationships within an agent-based model, where the environment is changing, captured through a satellite time series, where the population is changing, captured through a longitudinal social survey, where the road structure and the infrastructure is changing, the nature of communities are changing, how do you in fact begin to conceive the rules and the nature of the weights and relationships? You can do it by theoretical approaches, what you expect it to be. You could create scenarios where you test the nature of the weights and see what matters and what doesn't matter. You can use weights from regression models and other kinds of quantitative tests as the first cut. And so through this example, I'm going to show you where, in fact, we've used a variety of approaches to try to get to these relationships. So here's our study area once again. It is flanked by protected areas. You might have been reading recently in Ecuador the ITT initiative. It's an attempt by the Ecuadorian government to keep the oil in the ground and to have concerned nations pay Ecuador money to keep the oil in the ground. That has failed. No big surprise, I suppose. Norway was one of the countries that pledged millions of dollars to help keep oil in the ground. So there is a contentious issue right now of what's going to happen to these protected areas and the indigenous communities that in and around these protected areas. So here's our study area, one of our study areas. These green lines are individual farms. Now, those aren't all control farms. In that particular area, we only had about 150 control farms that we surveyed at 2 different time periods, and we mapped the land cover change and did a lot of control work to make sure we had it right. But what we needed to do is to get the full population up there, because there's a lot of labor sharing between the farms that is formal and informal. And how to begin to capture that if you're only looking at the survey farms. So what we did is we used the satellite time series. We looked at changes on the landscape, and so we could map farms by date brackets. And then we could use the characteristics of our survey farmers to inform what those characteristics should be at those population brackets or age brackets of our farms. This way we could get a population, and we knew something about the demographics that we could assume. So what did we try to do? We really tried to look at the decision-making processes of individual farmers. At the household level, we again used the longitudinal social survey. We again, satellite time series. We used GIS to capture the resource endowments and geographic accessibilities. But in all of these approaches, which have been fairly our standard formula, I suppose, we're interested in trying to understand how do these relationships and what is the nature of farming decision-making about land use. Okay. So here's the way the model sets up. We have individual agents running across the landscape, and we have demographic characteristics of them. We have a land use layer that tells us something about land cover from a satellite time series. We have parcel data from our individual surveys, and we have individual farms. So we can move between the 3 of these. There was a paper in 2011 in Applied Geography that talks specifically about that model. I'm going to show you some of these kind of diagrams here. I'm only going to focus on a few elements, so don't get too concerned. This is basically a graphic to say that agriculture, demography, and migration modules were heavily important in our work. The agricultural module basically is trying to look at land change on a farm and assets. The demography model is basically looking at population change by looking at probabilities of birth, probabilities of marriage, probabilities of death. We're looking at migration module, basically looking at whether people are moving in and out of families, whether they're out migrating back to Quito or other places. Okay. Again, I'll pick and choose here a little bit. This is the initialization module. In essence, what we're trying to do is look at the key elements. The raster things, we're interested in land use, land cover, parcels, parcel ID, farm ID, age, slope, distance to roads, kind of some of the key issues that we decided were important. We're using a life table to try to understand mortalities, fertilities, when people marry, and we're using it on solid Ecuadorian demographic data, so we're not just grabbing these numbers, we're looking at standard situations, not only for Ecuador as a country, but Ecuador and Amazon as a particular. And so we could begin to understand the probabilities of population change. Because one of the things we really wanted to understand is the aging of the household as different needs from subsistence agriculture to commercial agriculture come into mind, where marriage and job sorting enters into it. We use some of our statistical relationships built and defined in other papers to look at migration modules. So this is where regression weights really helped us understand whether children of a certain age stay on the farm or out-migrate, and what is the nature of remittances as a consequence. For the agricultural module, what we're saying is we're trying to understand the nature of consumption demands. So we could look at the number of people on the household. We determine the value of consumption based on what is normal on Ecuadorian farms. We're looking at the ability of people to change from subsistence agriculture to commercial agriculture. There's a cost to change for crop switching, and so we built that in. In all of these situations, again, we're using regression models to help us with the first cuts of weights, where we had those and where we had those analyses already completed. Direct your attention, if you can see it, to the upper left. Yes, all right, so there's a lot of things going on in this place. And the notion here is household decision making. And the issue is how do people decide what to do? In the upper left, it is trying to suggest that there are three different approaches that we decide. One, they could decide that imitation is the best form of flattery, and that within their geographic domain, they could see the farmer that always does well, that always chooses the right crop, always plants it in the right form, always plants the right size, understands market conditions and commodity prices, etc. He's always a winner. And so we wanted to allow our farmer to copy somebody and to imitate the kinds of changes. We also wanted the person to be able to do random things, to be able to just change and flip as they saw fit. And we wanted to be able to do that. We also wanted social interaction strategies to happen, where friends or relatives within the same household or within alternate households, brothers, father and son on different farms, how they could legitimize a strategy to minimize economic shocks and risk by creating a strategy that benefited both of them. Maybe not in a single year, but over a series of years, they would learn and adapt to changing conditions. And so we wanted that to be in the decision-making module. There's a lot of other stuff. The end outcome, of course, is that we see a landscape that we kind of understand. Maps don't always tell they certainly don't tell the process. They tell the story of a group of farms chosen for year 1, year 8, year 16, and year 25, and how they all basically transition from primary forest to something else, primarily pasture and agriculture. And so what we're really interested in is the demographic shifts. We're interested in the processes of accumulating wealth and assets. We're interested in the processes of how towns and accessibility is changing the deforestation patterns. We're interested in how the aging of the household is changing the nature of household necessities, from subsistence agriculture to cash and other things for school, healthcare, and so forth. So we had a whole group of people involved, from climatologists to social demographers, and that was the take on that model. Some of the key findings, I suppose, is information sharing, reallocation of land through kinship ties and sale, adjacency effects of local farms. All these things are important, certainly within a multi-level context where individual household decisions are conditioned by the characteristics of the nearby household. Exploration of emergence and self-organization through the behavior of household agents within a dynamic environment. Let's switch once again. The Galapagos. In 2006, my first visit there. I've now been there like 40 or 45 times. But we also have a building there. And the issue is that the Galapagos Islands, while it's thought of as Darwin's paradise or the Enchanted Islands or a variety of other things, it's an archipelago in crisis. It's an archipelago that is wrestling with what to do with human-environment interactions. There's 185,000 tourists that come each year. There's 30,000 people that live on 4 populated islands. That's not the identity that you hear about the Galapagos, but it's a reality of what the Galapagos is. So what I'm going to do is show you a little bit about that, point towards a model that looks at subsidies and tries to look at invasive plants. One of the big issues in the Galapagos is invasive species. Okay. Some of the central questions are issues of economic development and resource conservation. How do you balance these things? Is it sustainable or not? Is this place sustainable or not? Causes and consequences of human-environment interactions. Central important questions. So this is what it looks like. It's volcanic, much like the Hawaiian Islands in that way. A volcanic hotspot with plates moving above. The islands are oldest to the east, youngest to the west. Some are seamounts that are now below the surface of the ocean. I decided I couldn't resist showing you a few animal pictures, I suppose, with the giant tortoises around one of the volcanoes. And the things that the Galapagos is known for, kind of its iconic species, the swimming marine iguanas, the little Galapagos penguins. This is purely to keep you interested. I'm not above that. And to try to identify the nature of challenges here. So in 2007, the Galapagos was declared by UNESCO, which had previously declared it a World Heritage Site, declared it a World Heritage Site at risk. And it was at that at-risk list for 3 years. Many people think it should still stay on that at-risk list because it is not dealing effectively with the challenges of human population. In 1990, there were 10,000 residents. Now there's 30,000. In 1990, there were 40,000 visitors a year. Now it's 185. Okay? So the rate of increase is dramatic. And what comes with the rate of increase of population is the demand for water, energy, fuel, the creation of waste, demand for more fresh water, the introduction of invasive flora and fauna. All of these things are part of what the challenge to the Galapagos. Indirect effects as well. Sinking of a ship. Fortunately, the diesel oil went out to sea and was evaporated. This was 2001. We do have illegal fishing. This is a hammerhead shark. They're even more scary when you snorkel and swim close to them. And we've now basically created a land bridge between the Galapagos Islands. There are 1,000 kilometers off the coast of Ecuador, but in fact there's 30 to 35 flights a week. There's cargo ships in perpetual motion, bringing food and water and potato chips and batteries and trinkets to the Galapagos. And in terms of density, the archipelago is about 97% protected. There are 3% which are human use zones. This is an image, I think, in 2001. In 63, it almost had nothing. In 85, also limited in 2001. So the nature of the build-out, the densification, is dramatic in the Galapagos, and something clearly needs to be done. We have a new project. I call it, jokingly, the President's Project, because we were asked by the President of Ecuador to try to address the issue of what's happening in the Galapagos and how many people can it really hold. They use the term carrying capacity. That's not a great term. It suggests that things are static, things aren't static. But it's an issue that is a real problem. And this is what a town looks like. It's not kind of the Darwin's paradise. It is that still, but it is more so. It is more complex than that, like most places are. So, I was conducting a graduate seminar at my department on land use modeling, and we decided that we would build a model and write some papers instead of writing more term papers. And so the group chose a software package that was relatively simple. It had to be all done in one semester. We chose NetLogo. It's pretty useful. It's publicly available. It's free. It has some functionality issues, but it is easy to use and free. And so in this case, we're looking at trying to integrate population and environment. We're looking at issues of household livelihoods. Household livelihoods are directly involved in the issue of protection and conservation in the Galapagos. We're looking at, in this particular model, agricultural subsidies, global fisheries, and decline in tourism. And I'll try to describe all of those. So in this case, where all the others, the Thailand work, the Amazon work, was site-specific. The data were spatially explicit to real, honest-to-goodness places. This was not the case. Which island do you choose? If you choose one, you bias against the others. The islands aren't alike in a lot of different ways. So we decided we'd build a virtual island, a virtual Galapagos, that had the characteristics of the Galapagos, but clearly not any of the Galapagos. It does have an urban area down by the marine. We have agricultural highlands. This whole area is wrapped or adjacency by the protected areas. So we built this kind of place. We created a number of agents. We were interested in farmers, fishermen, tourist workers, park employees, and invasive species. We're working on a project now where the agent is the plant itself, and so we're trying to model the distribution of seeds as the plant migrates across the landscape. In this case, we're looking at it a little bit differently. Okay, so the model specifications. We're interested in the number of tourists that are arriving. We're interested in something about fishing. Their primary job sectors are tourism, fisheries, and agriculture. Also government, I suppose. There's a lot of jobs in government. So we're interested in the tourism industry. That's the one that stirs the pot. That's where the money is. That's what draws Ecuadorians over for jobs. By law, they make twice as much in the islands than they do on the continent. And that's enough to bring people over. Partly because it's expensive to live, rates are higher, everything's higher in the Galapagos, but there's also an opportunity to make a lot more money. We're interested in boat licenses, given that not anybody can become a fisherman if they decide. You can't go right down to the shore and throw a pole in. You have to have a boat license, it has to be approved, and there are only a certain number that are allowed. We're interested in looking at selling of products, so commodity shocks and quantity prices, startup costs, maintenance costs, etc. Okay. The model basically acknowledges the existence of exogenous factors, of course. What happens in UN about UNESCO and what happens in the continent of Ecuador has a lot to say about what happens in the Galapagos. And so we want to be able to institute policies, agricultural policies, environmental policies. What is the charging fee of tourists coming into the Galapagos? Is there a cap on how many tourists? Right now there isn't. There are other forms of caps. Something about global commodities, given that the lobsters and other things end up in the U.S. Whitefish end up, grouper end up in other places as well. Sea cucumbers end up in Asia. Shark fins end up wherever. A lot of that is illegal. And so we're looking at this, basically, this exogenous issues, endogenous issues, and the key that I want to emphasize is the notion of household livelihoods. How do we go about addressing household livelihoods? Most people in the Galapagos work simultaneously across all the sectors. If they can do tourism, they do it because that's where the money. They may have their heart and soul in fisheries, and right now there are a lot of regulations about quotas and seasons and so forth. Almost no one, agriculture is dying. Issues of government subsidies to help with food security issues in the Galapagos is something that they're working on. So in essence then, there's a landscape module that is defined by terrain data, land use parcels, guava, which is the invasive plant, one of the chief invasive plants, updates on farm parcels such that farmers are being pushed off the land, they're also being pulled off the land, they're being pushed off by the invasive species, they're being pulled off by opportunities in tourism, and how to begin to look at that. On the agent side, we want to allow agents to acquire knowledge, because not anybody can move into tourism. Pretty much you have to have English. You have to make that transition. There are other requirements, of course. And so we wanted to be able to update our agent characteristics. We wanted to begin to look at the nature of guava. We wanted to begin to look at the accumulation of wealth by household agents, particularly as they tried to maintain flexibility to change between job sectors. So there's a simple interface that we built so that we get this very visual kind of virtual landscape where we have fishermen, not quite walking on water, but they're nonetheless in the ocean, indicating that they're active fishermen with active boat licenses and active part of their economic livelihood for their household. We have guava up in the highlands in the agricultural zones. We have agents there trying to clear the land, etc. And over time, we basically have built a whole series of sliders that allow us to play with the various inputs. Everything from the number of fishing stocks to tour stocks and farmers, job switching costs, spread rates of guava, park managers and their engagement in the process. And all of this is based on real data, real analyses. But the advantage is that as the model iterates, you begin to see the nature of these changes. What we have also done is impose El Nino events. What is very troubling for the iconic species in the Galapagos are El Nino events that cause a change in the ocean temperatures, change in major populations of marine species, major die-offs of penguins and sea lions, and many of the iconic species that bring tourists and tourist dollars to the Galapagos Islands. And so we wanted to look at that. So, what did we look at here? We looked primarily at agricultural subsidies. There is a government program to try to retain people in the agricultural sector. One, to decrease the number of cargo ships that move back and forth between the continent and the islands. And so what level would in fact cause people to pause and to stay in agriculture up in the highlands, and to attract the kind of labor that is necessary to do the eradication of the invasive species. We certainly looked at the issue of land abandonment. That is an important process in the Galapagos. It's either partial abandonment or entire farm abandonment. Again, what happens on adjacent farms affects what happens on your farm, and certainly the movement of invasive species is part of that. The accumulation of experience and knowledge, and how that is effective both in teaching and in the transition to tourism. While we were doing that work, we also decided, well, we look at tourism as a sectoral choice for people living in the Galapagos, but how might we think about tourism itself, tourism as an enterprise? And so in this case, and this is going to be very quick, in this case, we're looking at individual-based representation of tourist preferences and tourist accommodation offers. In other words, it is now the people like us trying to figure out, what do we want to go see in the Galapagos? Do we want to go? What are the competitions to other important places around the world? There are other places beyond Galapagos, maybe. And what things do they want to do? What islands do they want? What accommodation offers do they want? Do they want to come in and stay at land-based recreation in hotels? Do they want cruise-based recreation? Which islands do they want to go see, and what things do they want to do when they're there? Given that boats can only accommodate so many people, certain boats have certain tracks, how do you put all that in an agent-based model so that you can allow the agency to change the nature of offers and the agent to understand what they want, the cost of that, and how all this basically settles out within an agent-based model. So, the agents include market agents that can create and delete new tourist operators and offers, and change the price of offers based on evolutionary algorithms. So we do use that, and that's kind of a new introduction in some of our work. Just believe me that there is three things here that I wanted to mention. We have a tourist generation offer situation where they choose between cruises and hotels. They look at various accommodations, they choose an offer, they decide on how long they want to go, how long they want to stay, which hotels they want to stay at, which boats they want to go on, and what things they want to do. Each island offers different things, and so the tourist is choosing packages that relate to their preferred needs. There is offers that are already being updated and changed, and so we want to be able to allow that to happen. We have a market operator who is basically looping through the offers, creating random offers, other ways to entice tourists into the Galapagos. So, what we learned here is basically the middle one, the strong feedback loop between available accommodation offers, tourist types, and environmental features of the tourist experience. All of that is involved in the same kind of operation. All right, some overall. The experiments that we've been doing, whether they be in Thailand or the Amazon or now in the Galapagos, are really about trying to understand how processes work. That's really what we think is exportable across the study sites. Even the architecture of the models are somewhat similar. Certainly the ingredients of social surveys and satellite data and GPS and GIS are all fundamentally the same. So the issue is, what do we learn? Certainly the experiments provide insights into what processes we're really trying to understand about land use. We're interested in alternate responses to the same problem, in part caused by environmental settings, in part caused by socioeconomic characteristics. We're interested in trying to decompose why people are choosing differently, and what are the forces that allow that to happen. We're certainly interested in self-organization. We're in systems that have many dimensions, such as many decision makers, and those decision makers are looking at structures such as land use patterns or land use change. There may only be a few outcomes that are possible. And the issue is can, basically, the limit of range of outcomes based on precisions in initial conditions reduce our possibilities, reduce the nature of our understanding. So we have a large number of actors, we have relatively few options or outcomes that are even possible. How can we begin to understand self-organization when in fact that is the possibility? Last point, self-organization limits divergence of model outcomes. Over long periods, exogenous forces may overwhelm any self-organization. So the issue is that where we're running simulations for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, we might in fact lose sight of self-organization as a consequence of the relatively short period. Or if we run it longer, there might be exogenous forces that in fact mask the self-organization. And that is a normal thing to think about as well. I think we have just a little bit more time, and let me show you, and this is kind of a commercial, I suppose. What gets me to the Galapagos a lot is this new building called the Galapagos Science Center. It's not so big. It's about 20,000 square feet. It is designed to do the kind of research we're talking about. It has basically 4 laboratories, a microbiology and genetics laboratory, marine ecology, terrestrial ecology, and spatial analysis and modeling. It has other things in there as well. We do have a lot of interns, visiting scientists. We've created this international science consortium that involves institutions in Asia and Germany and Australia so far, and America as well. But it's a wonderful place to try to understand a special place. This is our location right here on the beach. So when I come back with a tan, I really catch hell.
Scientists on the beach?
Yeah. Well, we are looking at sea lions as well. So my last slide is basically that all the places I've been working in are interesting unto themselves. They are special case studies, of course. But people in land use, land change community have been criticized by only looking at so many case studies. How do these case studies distill, synthesize into something richer? Is it possible? And I think the burden is on us to try to be clear about what we're learning. And in our case, we focus probably more so than most, I suppose, about rich process understanding. We don't build a model to run 50 years, 100 years. We know that the stability of the rules and the nature of the population, it gets pretty dicey pretty quickly. So we don't care about trying to understand a final outcome. What we try to understand is, do we have a handle on the process? And that's how this has been working for us. We thought for one time that the agent-based model would help us generalize results. And what we think we found more, that it gives us more variability. It gives us a whole suite of choices that we kind of didn't quite anticipate. And so these are all interesting places. The Galapagos has got my attention right now. But we're still wrapping up the other projects after many, many years. And it's been a great opportunity to tell you a little bit about it. So thank you.